Hello and welcome to a Taylor's Tales podcast. This is Chris's Corner. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, and we're back this week with a brand new guest. I'd love to welcome one of the old friends of many people in my hometown of Dalhurst. It's David Canham. How you doing, David?
Very well, thank you, Chris. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, bud. Happy New Year. To those listening, my previous podcast, I have been rude. I have forgotten to say Happy New Year to all of you. So for that past remark, I'll say Happy New Year to you all now. Dave, what's been going on in your life? How's things? How's life going?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Just cracking on really. I'm a teacher, so sort of school's still going ahead, albeit virtually. Had a lovely Christmas break, which was great, and yeah, just kind of cracking on with everything. I think what we can do to our sort of best abilities, really keeping fit and healthy, and seeing people for socially distanced walks and stuff like that. But it's all a bit different, isn't it?
A new reality with new ways of living. But I love that you brought up your teaching straight off. So you're an essential worker, and in my eyes, all teachers are anyway. And we're going to straight that out there. So you are somebody who's on the front lines, so similar to one of my mum's friends, who's a nurse. I consider you guys in the same line of work, basically, because you're dealing with little monsters like kids on a daily basis. I kid, of course, but to those who don't know you, apart from being a teacher, how do you introduce yourself to those?
Have you ever seen Brad Pitt in Troy?
Yes.
Nothing like that. Yeah, just I don't know. I guess a bit of a gentle giant, really. Someone who's kind of a bit of a big kid, pretty difficult to embarrass. Although I'm sure at some points in this podcast that will be broken.
No, mate. I permanently put myself in a state of embarrassment just by doing this podcast in the first place, bud. So you don't need to worry about that. We'll put it all on my end, and we'll focus on that. But that's a lovely way to put yourself, because I would definitely agree with that. You are someone of a gentle giant who has the ability to take on anybody with force if need be. So yeah, no, I totally agree. And to those listeners, I've known Dave for, it feels like a lifetime, but really we don't know each other too well. So this is like our first time talking in a while, and I see you at social events through our common ally Jonathan Edwards, who's been on the podcast before, and this is nice to. I'm following a bit of his advice, in the sense that I'm trying to reconnect with people who I think have something to give in this life, and Dave's one of these people. So Dave, straight off the mark, COVID's affected a lot of people. It's forced me into being creative in one way or another. How's it made you look into life? Have you done anything special? Have you done things differently recently?
Well, I mean, I think COVID and lockdown in itself has been a really interesting sort of phase of everyone's lives, in that I think for a period of time people resorted to looking outward and going on their phones, digital, social media, and all that. And there comes a point, I think, where everyone had done enough outward looking, and started looking inside and reflecting on what they want, how they're going to go about achieving that. So for me, it's been a matter of thinking, like doing that sort of self-reflection and thinking, where am I going? What do I want to achieve? And like, how am I going to feel fulfilled? So yeah, absolutely. Like you just alluded to, being creative there. So kind of taking up different pillars, I guess, in your life, where you have sort of like creative outlets, logical ones, physical, mental, spiritual well-being, and trying to make sure that you bring them all up together. That's going to be my way of cruising through this, really, and just bouncing off those different pillars.
Is there anything that sticks out for you? Do you think, like, for instance, something that I am forcing myself into doing in one way or another is meditation? My mind is, it's ticking constantly. There's always something going on in there. Do you find yourself having to deal with the mad monkey mind, as I put it?
Yeah, it's a really important thing you bring up, and I feel one that we don't really focus too much on in education and in sort of a institutional setting, actually, and one I think we should definitely go into more detail on. And you bring up a really good point. And meditation's an interesting one, isn't it? How do you meditate? What's your way of doing that?
I'm unorthodox. I used to use Headspace, I've said this before on the podcast, and I'm happy to put it out again. I take Star Wars meditation music and I put it in the background, and basically I'll sit in a corner and I'll just have the Star Wars theme going, and I'll try my best to get 10 minutes of just inward reflection, just saying, the Force, I'm one with the Force is with me. And I'll say that over and over again. It sounds silly saying it out loud, but it stops me from thinking, it stops me from doing anything. I don't know about you, but do you have anything that you do like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really important. I mean, I wouldn't say I go through sort of the sun salutations of yoga or anything like that, but I have my kind of, morning mantra, which is sort of like a prayer, if you like. We go for that every morning and evening. And just having sort of routines, moments in the day where you're sort of exercising sort of little disciplines, really. And I think that's just when you're disassociating your mind with the molds that you're putting out into the world and that ego. And it might just be little practices, like the first thing I'll ever do before I get out of bed is say that mantra, and then I'll make my bed straight away, like the first thing I ever do. And I've done that since I was really young, and it just sets like the tone for the day. So if I come back to that bed later in the evening and I've achieved absolutely nothing with my time, I've always made my bed, and that's going to one up, if you like, on the start of the day.
That's so good. I love that. You've clicked onto something that I hold very dear to my heart. I talk about with friends and a lot about Jordan Peterson. And if you don't know who he is, he says to do what you've done, to make your bed in the morning, to tidy your room, to reflect your mind. And I love that. You're saying you're starting the day off positively. Well, that's, even if you don't accomplish anything, that's it, man. You've done it.
You already have. I mean, Peterson's an incredible psychologist, and he's done some great work. So, if he's saying this, probably got some weight.
Yeah, man. But it's not just him. Like, if you don't like Jordan, and there's a lot of people who don't for some reason, there's also people like David Goggins. There's these military guys out there who say making your bed in the morning has a reflection on who you are as a person in tidiness, and you can be trusted to do the small tasks, to take on the bigger tasks down the line.
Yeah, it's interesting on the military. So I remember year 10, went into the army for our work experience, and they hammered that into us, make our beds, and if it was a crease on it, they'd flip it, and we were back to square one. And it doesn't matter if it took an hour, it was still going to be a perfect spread.
I can definitely relate. I did cadets, and I know exactly what that's all about in the early days of the bed flipping. When you're, I think I was like 14 or 15, you're terrified of this ginormous guy who just flipped it. This isn't good enough. Do it again. Just
absolutely crushing. But yeah, I think exercise is a really good discipline for sure, and just cracking on, really.
I totally agree, mate. I love that, and I love that you've brought up that just almost there's a level of gratitude, isn't there, for just doing those small things.
So we live in a time, don't we, which is just so quick, it's so fast paced, and just taking those times just to pause and be in the moment, even if it is brushing your teeth or whatever it is, it's just making sure you're holding the present time. I think that's strengthening those connections and those opportunities, not to be in the future or in the past in your head. That's really important, and what it's all about, really. We spend too much of our time not in the moment, and taking all those times just to be so is so essential to good mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, bud. And I was going to ask this as well. In my mind, this is an essential for the next generation. How do you have any sort of influence in your new job in a way that you would like to bring this forward? That you would like to sort of put exercise and meditation and all these on the kids that you're teaching?
That's a great question. I think the role of any teacher goes beyond their subject and what they teach. It's a massively pastoral role. We take the role of counsellor, parent, obviously classroom academic, and it's a bit of a concoction, really. So I think just exercising the understanding in yourself. So if you've got a kid who's maybe demonstrating like a misbehaviour, to identify that individual is, I used to sort of say that children are symptoms, not causes. So if they're exhibiting behaviours which are tricky, there's probably a reason behind that, and it's probably not you. So it's about kind of removing yourself in that mold, how you want that child to conform to being, and having those sort of progressive conversations with them, saying to them, instead of, so giving them a detention straight away, saying, do you understand how that's made me feel? Why are you feeling that way? How can I help you there? And that, again, that reflection that they're then doing, it's like teaching somebody to fish versus buying them one, that kind of biblical story, right? It's progressive, and they can take that forward with them. And then for their next classroom teacher, they'll recognize that behavior, hopefully. And that's what I see as kind of a coaching perspective for young people. And I would almost argue that stuff is more important than their academic grades, because it's going to take them further, for sure. Something I would, if I had the power, build into the curriculum. Obviously, yeah, so it's a very big question.
Dude, no, I love that. I really do. And what you've just described is something that is missing from a lot of people in our generation now, is that there's a lot of annoyance, in the sense that you felt a lot of your problems can be dismissed very easily by others. And everyone has their own problems. And like you've just said there, that kid's problems may not be anything to do with you. And the fact that you're taking the time to just ask them, why, what's going on, like, that could just be an absolute floodgate overload. One day you may find yourself with a child who may just cry and boo and just let it out, because you're the first person to just ask, what's going on, how are you, how's things going, before, I just remember, if you didn't do as you're told, detention, get out, done, that was it. So it's amazing to hear that.
I think especially within state education as well, we've got, I'm teaching 30 students at once, and you've got student A who's had caviar for dinner, and student B who's had a bottle of Coke for breakfast.
Yes.
And there's such a spectrum there, isn't there, of emotions and all those kind of past experiences, and you then got to kind of factor that into how you respond. And there is an argument to kind of act holistically and to treat everyone the same way, but I would argue that doesn't get you, certainly doesn't get in you in their good books, because sometimes people need, even people who aren't students, so they just want somebody to ask them if they're all right, and that can be enough. and that can be really, really fundamental and progressive for them that further down the line. So just knowing that someone's there to talk to them and not tell them off all the time is essential.
100%. And I love, and the effect that you're going to have is going to be a domino effect as your career goes on, I imagine. I have no experience with kids. I have no experience. So there's no way that I should be putting out opinions on this at all. But having someone like yourself giving this context, given, you're fighting the good fight, and that we can be out here knowing that there's someone out there trying their best, trying, the emphasis on the word in the first place, that you've taken the first step, and you're not blaming others, and you're not blaming the kid, and it's not something that you could just be shunning off on society. It's this ability to just take that first step and make it happen, It's incredible. Anyway, I'm going to move on before I get too sentimental, mate. That's just incredible. You just kicked something off there.
Right in,
crazy. Yeah. But yeah, so we've talked about a little bit of everything there. We've moved on, gone from mindfulness, meditation, talking as a teacher. I do want to focus in on that a little bit, in the sense that what made you get into teaching? Because you've been you've been very much into geography, but what made you focus on teaching?
Well, I mean, for me, I guess the question I was asking myself was, sort of went through school, A levels, my degree, graduate program, and then PGCE, and I knew that whatever I was going to do, whatever job I was going to be in for the long run, the capacity had to be that I was around kind of development of other people, and I like to leave people in a better place than I found them. And I think that in teaching you can access that, and I think it also allowed me to exercise like a subject that I do really have a passion for. So with geography, for example, I'm really interested in people and places, and that is in essence what geography is. And I think it's a really exciting time for the subject as well, where a lot of your listeners will be thinking about their geography lessons and saying, well, we just learn about places and flags and capital cities. And that's absolutely part of it. But it's definitely moving away now from labeling the world, how many sort of flags can you identify, to unveiling it and making those connections and analyzing trends and links. And in a world, I guess, which is being progressively like dominated by chats of sustainability and global warming, I would even argue it's like really necessary now to understand what it means to have a finite resource or a renewable energy source. And we can explore all those things as long as you can touch it, into a location or people, whatever it might be. You can hone in on that, and that can be a lesson. So it's massively varied, and I think teaching just day to day is so different. You can never master it. It takes a lifetime. But that's great, and I think that therefore allows me to develop every day too. So bit of a double win.
Oh, mate, yeah, without a doubt. And the fact that you're taking each day as it is and just trying to move with it is key as well. That's something to focus in on. But I was going to say that's such a interesting topic in the first place. I can definitely understand why you're into it, because today's technology needs to reflect the needs of the future just as much as it is in just getting things done. And so renewable energy source, we got a couple of solar panels on the roof. I love the fact that, it's possible. We need to teach kids that there's this ability to make that choice. Now, the fact that my family have the ability to do that is definitely a privileged one, but also it's understanding in the first place that you can make the choice to do so, whether you are or you aren't. And there is a line there that is saying, we're going to try and help not just us, but we're going to try and help the future as well, and it's very difficult. How are you getting that across to kids? Because this is like such a complex, just for someone who's 25, who's been through university and is trying to comprehend some complex topics without a degree in geography. How are you getting that across to young people?
Communication in sort of science, which geography is sort of considered one, is a massive topic of debate at the moment, especially like academic literature. But we sort of definitely, first and foremost, comes your passion for geography. I think if any student can see that their teacher has a passion for the subject, and I'm sure you and your listeners have a teacher in mind you think about and go, oh, they were so passionate about what they said and did, and that immediately makes them feel interested and then engage. I think then it's about making sure that it's made accessible. So whatever you're trying to convey, you're sort of saying it in a way that they're understanding it. So use of analogies. Why is it relevant to them? How is it going to affect them in the long run? And you just touched on, for the longevity in the future of like humanity with sustainability. That's a really good example. And just making it fun, breaking it up, making it interesting, and that can be in different forms depending on the students and their kind of skill set that they have. So it's never the same with class to class, but yeah, we try different activities.
Can't imagine it is one bit, but I was going to ask about that as well, because we're in COVID, you're in lockdown, you're doing this amazing thing where you are trying to get it across on a day-to-day basis. How is online learning taking a turn for you? And have you found that it's been difficult to still get that message across, even if you are as passionate as you are for geography?
Well, I mean, so this is my first week of online learning full time, obviously with the announcement, school closures a couple of days back. This is our first week as teachers doing that for the entire sort of secondary school. At present, I haven't really got the feedback in terms of kind of how students are responding to it all, but it seems to be going well. You can still record lessons and convey those messages with your enthusiasm, absolutely. And it's just making sure that those students are then able to access that content, and that goes into a whole melting pot of questions and issues and stuff around sort of technology, and can students all access those things. But yeah, it's undoubtedly easier in a classroom when you have your own space and that kind of student teacher relationship there. But my hope is that we can still do our work and help these young people to fulfill and grow and meet those kind of not just academic requirements, but kind of social understandings of those topics we do teach.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you've said there that has immediately made me latch on and sort of really think about it is the fact that, do kids have access? Do they have the technology to be able to do so? The irony is that companies that I work for and others in the IT industry, we throw away all of this technology that these kids could be using in the first place, even if it is redundant. So let's say it's a Windows 7 machine or something that is outdated in the industry, it would still provide somebody who's in a vulnerable place where they can't get access to the internet, where they can't get access because they may not be able to afford it. There needs to be some sort of program, maybe not government, because the government is already trying to do the best it can in the scenario that we have, but maybe there needs to be some sort of solution. Have you ever thought about this with anyone at all?
I mean, it's no big secret that there are families and people out there who won't have the privilege and access to remote learning in the way that other people do. We hear stories about families with 6 children all trying to access 6 different types of lessons with one computer, and it's just, I think, just amplifies the issue really, and probably the resistance from the government to close schools down. And it's a real moral dilemma, I think, for a lot of teachers as well, because you know we do this job, not for the money, but because we want to make sure that young people are safe and secure, and you're safeguarding them, and you're helping them to develop. And you can't do that to the degree that we want to if students are back home. And so a lot of teachers don't want to leave school, but then are equally aware of the difficulties and the dangers of the virus. And so it is a bit of a battle between, I need to make sure that I'm healthy and secure so I can do my job, and making sure that my family, the people who I go home to, are safe. But equally, I need to facilitate the safeguarding of these young people as well. And yeah, it's definitely a battle, bit of a balance. I think that what you have alluded to is really, really interesting. And I wasn't aware that IT companies such as the one that you're working for do throw away all those kind of pieces of software. I don't know if that's something you could talk about with your with your managers.
There's definitely something out there, Bud, and I think that it's not just the company I work for. There's companies out there that I've worked for previously that I thoroughly have seen them physically throw them away. So it does make it bring to question when you are trying to have this battle. You are underfunded. You're not getting paid to do these things for fun. This is something that it's quite serious, and yet there's very little outside help other than from the government. And I know I'm not alluding to a question here, but I am kind of interested in your perspective at the same time on the topic. Do you think this could be something that maybe there needs to be something other than the government pushing for this? And do you think that this could be something that is set up through, how do I put this, outside of a governmentary fund that could help schools in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at another example, let's say like food banks, for example, food banks aren't always run by government initiatives. There have been instances where massive supermarket chains have been seen to be discarding really absolutely fine food and not giving it to, let's say, people who can't afford it, or maybe homeless, or even to food banks. And they've taken the initiative and the drive to then go and deliver that off their own back to food banks, where people can go and acquire those goods. And I don't see how it can be any different with technology industry based companies, where if you've got 100 laptops which are out of date, yeah, you can throw them in the bin, absolutely. But where would be the harm in just nipping down to your local school and saying, hi, look, we've got these, take it or leave it? But I'm sure they're not going to say no. And that's no sweat off the government's back at all. That could be a private company initiative and choice.
I think you've given me something to think about there, Bud, and for me to go away with. So that's task for Chris to sort out in his own time. So there we go. Moving on from that, and I do want to stick on the teaching topic, because I can see that you're passionate and I can see the enthusiasm for this part of your life. And I wanted to know, is there someone who stands out as a teacher in your past, or somebody in today who's made you go down this path? Or it may not be a person, it may have just been something you've always wanted to do. So I was keen to see what you thought on that.
Well, yeah, I say I've always wanted to sort of teach in some capacity, and that sort of developmental aspect. Um, I'm surrounded by sort of a family of teachers. So mum is a special needs teacher,
Yes.
brother's a teaching assistant, and I've been a teaching assistant before going to university as well. So I was always quite aware of the educational side of things. I had generally a really positive um, sort of time at my own throughout my own education. I had a great form tutor in year 7, who I think as an 11-year-old I sort of looked up to as a bit of a god. This man who seemed to have everything together, and probably didn't, but I just liked the way that he could sort of resolve issues, and I definitely thought that that was a really important thing that he was doing, and something that I could see myself wanting to do in the future. It also, I think, is a really sociable job, and I could see that a lot of teachers who I spoke to and was taught by had these really sort of positive interactions, not only with staff and colleagues, but also with students and young people. And that's a really good social skill to be able to develop. So that was a kind of melody, I guess, of reasons why I wanted to go into it. And I think it's sort of like a natural progression of things, really. It's all just kind of fell into place.
I Yeah, I get you there, because I had a very similar experience with my form tutor. He was a legend, just like yours, it sounds like, and he had that effect of, I mean, poor guy. I just think back to all of the stuff he had to deal with growing up. I mean, it wasn't necessarily me, but I wasn't like, there was problems, but I watched as the problems unraveled around him, because we had quite a tough group of lads being in that form lab. I don't know about yourself, but there's always going to be some characters.
Oh, absolutely. There are times we think back to in school, I think we'll go, how on earth did we get away with that? Like, if that went on in my classroom, I'd absolutely be having none of it. But no, it's some good stories definitely from that side of things.
Yeah. No, thank you very much as well for I don't want to mention anyone's name, because they could be currently teaching, they could be currently working. So we will, if anyone's name comes up, you will be bleeped out immediately, because everyone wants privacy in this world, and this is important. But we know who Dave's alluding to, and that's a good thing, because that person deserves credit. And hopefully, if they one day watch this, they understand the impact they've had on Dave and myself. So, excellent. I'm so glad that you said that, mate, as well, because we all need a muse in life to be able to get some sort of format, some sort of, how would you put it, a structure. And so you've talked about how you exercise, you do mindfulness, you do meditation, and all these things. You've talked about how you're teaching and you're passionate. Do these all click together? When did you figure this out? Was there a gradual process for you to get to this point?
To be fair, I think, like I say, with geography, it kind of has its hands in so many pies. Um, you know, Going sort of having an interest in like traveling. Well, of course, that's kind of countries. Sport was something that I got into from a very young age and could exercise through school, again, education. And I think just building up this picture, really, they all sort of seemed interlinked and not worlds apart, and can kind of, I guess, complement each other in many ways. Having passions for things like astronomy, well, that's just maps in the sky, right? And it's kind of it's all these different things that kind of come together. Absolutely. So I wouldn't say that they're in isolation per se.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, and I was going to say with astronomy, I recently read Neil deGrasse Tyson's book. I don't know if you've ever heard of him at all. He's somebody who's quite a strong, opinionated guy on the planets, on the solar systems, and how the whole thing came together. He's just an absolute character. Apart from our very own David Attenborough, I would say that he's also got something to bring to the table when it comes down to a voice that commands your interest. I don't know about you, but did you ever find that David Attenborough inspired you within like the way of the world when you were growing up at all?
Well, absolutely, a national treasure, right? I think there's reasons we still use his lessons, his videos and lessons today. Yeah, absolutely massive impact. He's that voice we all kind of go to in our heads of leading that national kind of front on what it is to make sure we understand the natural world and protect it and have it for the future, really, especially with this latest Netflix documentary. Not sure if you've seen that, but really worth a go. Yeah, I mean, I think it's for somebody to watch one of his programs and not be inspired to a degree by the natural world. That's a pretty big ask. Definitely has a way, doesn't he, of articulating it all and engaging you. And I think he comes across in a way that is very accessible again. So we can be learning about the gazelles of the savannah, but suddenly that's really interesting, and I want to know all about them just by the way he's explaining it and the knock-on impacts it has on food chains and stuff like that. So very good voice, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what you've just spoken about there actually backs up what you said earlier in the way that if passion is put into your project, you're gonna get other people to want to learn about the stuff that you're talking about. And Dave, ironically, your name David and David Attenborough, similar in the sense that you're putting in this passion into a subject to get others to listen as well. So I love that, and I think that it's important to understand the link between the two there. And even if you haven't heard of him before, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who also does the equivalent of the American version. So we've talked about, we haven't gotten to travel yet. That's a huge part to talk about for you, Dave, as well. So geography, very heavily linked with travel and very heavily linked in looking at the world in a different way and learning about different cultures. Do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to?
Stand out as just being so different, really. I mean, I've been at a few places, but I think when I was sort of 16, I went to Cambodia, which was a great experience that was run through school, actually. It was like a school expedition. Went out there and basically spent a month just going around the country. So we flew into Phnom Penh, the capital city, and then went to explore Angkor Wat, which is one of the sort of 7 ancient wonders of the world. It took 1 million men a lifetime to make this massive, beautiful sort of structure, and then spent 2 weeks in the Cardamom Mountains doing sort of wildlife conservation projects and setting that up, and then another week helping to establish an orphanage in a place called Takao, which is a really rural province, and that was just incredible, really. Going to an orphanage where this language barrier exists. None of us spoke Khmer, which is the local language. You've got 60 young people all running around. So I was saying, can I help? And you're literally, building up, bricks, or I think I was in charge of like an agricultural project, helping to sort of like till the land and map out the blueprints, thinking about what kind of vegetables and plants can grow in this kind of arid environment. It's very hot down there. It was just a massive eye opener at that age. And of course, Cambodia's got a very vivid history with dictatorships and the Pol Pot regime. So it's very humbling. I think I owe a lot to that country for its sort of development of me and the way I see the world today. And then more recently, I'd say Thailand. Vietnam's the next one. Thailand, which I went to over the summer, and it was definitely a less educational trip and one for leisure, but it's an absolutely beautiful place with some islands which are just, definitely worth a flight.
Yeah. Ironically, and kind of similarly, I went to both those countries back in March of 2019, and I can relate to that humble feeling that you're talking about, because they're all smiling out there. They're smiling, and they've just had an absolute horrible brought up. I mean, most of the people there are young people, aren't they? Because of the horrible scenario that they've been in. And yet they are earning less than $1 a day, basically. And I can see it in your eyes now that you recognize this as well. And yet they have some more happiness than I've seen in most people in the London Underground, who are earning 3,000 to 4,000 times that. Why do you think that is?
I think it goes to demonstrate that really happiness isn't equated to money. Money is definitely a means to access things which might make you happy, but happiness in itself is a choice. You can decide to be happy. You can make that vow with yourself and say, I decide and choose to be, and nothing's going to break that vow. And it has to be completely unconditional. And this is something I talk about with a lot of my friends who are going through relationship difficulties, for example, and they make that comment of, I want to be happy as long as I'm with dot dot dot. It's that thing of, well, happiness isn't a condition, it's a choice and a decision we make. You know, you might not be in that relationship in the future, but are you really going to let that break your vow? And I think the people of sort of Eastern cultures and traditions really, you know, personify that, and they take that with them day to day. And like you say, you can meet somebody on a street in Cambodia with very little, and they are the happiest person in the world. And like you say, those people on six-figure salaries are miserable. And obviously that's not, you know, black and white, and there are caveats to that, but yeah, it's a really humbling thing. And it definitely made you think, okay, if that's the case, then what's it all about? You know, this sort of Western idea of consumption and increased materialism equaling success is then really questioned. And if you can really bring that back into what we talked about earlier, like that meditation and reflection and directing where your energies are going, what you want from life, then suddenly actually earning that six-figure salary isn't the goal.
Yeah.
It's just not breaking that vow of happiness. And that's probably a more achievable aim, to be fair, and therefore makes sense to me to kind of definitely embark on that trial.
It's a tough road to go down, Dave. It's a tough road to tell people that their life isn't, the path they've been set isn't necessarily the path they should take. And I think you and me, we've just sort of recited almost the Buddhist way of life. I consider myself somebody of Buddhist beliefs. And I feel that when I was out in Thailand, where there's, you know, that's their main religion out there. I don't know about you, but the architecture and the sort of way that they paint the religion out there really has an effect on you. Did you see that when you saw some of the main sort of places to visit in, for instance, in Bangkok, they've got quite a few of the sort of shrines towards Buddha.
Yeah, you can't walk more than 100 meters, can you, without bumping into a temple or a shrine, like you say? But no, absolutely. It definitely draws out those kind of fundamental kind of beliefs and what it is, what's important really in the long run, and this kind of idea that there's like an earthly element to life, and we have to be pragmatic in the way that we operate. We need to go and get a job to have a sort of an existence in this Western world, but equally it's not about forgetting the other elements of things. People will call that the mind or being or spiritual, however you want to coin it, but I think that's fundamental as well. I mean, we all know that our physical bodies or our minds don't encapsulate who it is to be Chris or David. Actually, there's probably a part, you know, to us all that goes further and deeper, and that takes us with you. So yeah, no, absolutely, you've gone on to a really important thing, and something that, again, I think we need to remind ourselves of and exercise through sort of just being present and being in the moment, really.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's why I do these in the first place, this podcast. I'm locked into people. I'm here with you chatting. I'm here because I'm enjoying it. I get a thing, you know, I thrive in this environment of conversation, and I really enjoy that you're bringing up a lot of the things that I find it hard to express myself sometimes. And one of the ways that I do it is by writing in a journal. If I can't express something to someone else, I don't want to put my mental stresses. And I do love that you brought up relationships earlier, because some people can put their load on you, and they can say, why aren't I happy? Why tell me, Dave, what can I do to become better? And the problem is that they haven't addressed that they themselves are the reason why they are in that position in the first place, and that there is this level of extreme ownership and wanting to be able to take things on yourself and solve these problems. Now, traveling, I think, has awakened my mind, and I don't know about you, but it seems to have awakened yours as well in some way or another. Do you feel that different cultures have something to offer when it comes down to bringing yourself into being present, or being this happiness, finding this happiness in other cultures?
Absolutely. I think it's very easy to believe and identify with the sort of social norms and parameters that you are born into, right? So when, we're here in Reading at the moment, and as soon as we're born in the Royal Berkshire Hospital, you have this being, this person, and that's Chris, and it's an embodiment of everything Chris is going to be between now when you die. But you're fed this, what I like call a script, where on day one you're coined as a man, second day you're coined as Chris, third day that you have dark hair, fourth day that you have dark eyes, whatever it might be. And every day you're fed this image. When you're 6 months old, you go to touch a spider and your mum slaps your wrist and says, no, it's dangerous. So then you're kind of, in your mind, you're building up this image of how you're going to operate. And if you're around other people that are just the same, who have those similar kind of upbringings, then you don't know any different. You fly 12 hours around the world and suddenly you're around people who play with snakes because they're fun, who will eat a spider because it's nutritious. And there's no right or wrong. It's just broadening those horizons, really, and acknowledging that just because we're born into somewhere geographically or in a time, doesn't necessarily make the way that we operate any better or worse. What do those words even mean? It's completely spectral and of the time, and I think it's worth respecting, and to be honest, just soaking up as much of that as you can, because knowledge is power, right? The more we know, the more we can kind of figure out for ourselves. We're not trapped by those sort of social constructions.
Yeah, without a doubt. And from what you're processing there, in the sense that you're getting something different and you're finding yourself in a different place and a different culture, and it starts to shake up your life a little bit, and it starts to move yourself away from, and I don't know about you, and I'm not saying this to any of my current friends because I love them to death, but I'm saying at the time when I first went traveling, it did make me think about who I surrounded myself with. You start thinking to yourself, is this person good for me? You've gone away, you've talked to people who treat you better than the people who treat you back home. Like, what's going on there? Why do you think, if you've seen that? I mean, I remember when I first went to Australia and New Zealand, I never have been treated with such a friendliness by people who don't even know me. And then I come back home and I come to England and we're as cold as ice out here for some people. Do you see this into day-to-day life? Do you see this? I mean, has COVID, for instance, do you get people in Reading? Because out here in Dorset, when I go for a walk, I say hello to everybody. I'm like, hey, what's up? What's going on? Do you find that that's a thing down in the southeast, or is it geographic? Is it, there's so many ways I could put this, but what are your thoughts anyway?
That's really interesting to say about Dorset, actually. I think, in passing, if I'm going on a walk around our local woods or park and I see somebody, I'll say hi. That's just me. But I think it's probably the nature of big cities. Take London, for example. It's fast, isn't it? It's hungry, and therefore people might be a bit more sort of introverted and self-focused, and that's not good or bad. It's just how they operate within that context. But no, absolutely, it does make you question, doesn't it? When you come back home, you think, why are people acting in this way? And I think maybe part of the answer to that is that when you do go traveling, where you go away, you're making that decision, as are other people who you meet in that time, right? So you've already got that in common. So when you go to university, you're all there for the same reason. You've got something in common. You're probably going to vibe better with them than the person next door who you had no choice in moving next door to. So yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, of making decisions and then putting that out into the world. You get that back, and that energy is reciprocated. So no, it's an interesting one. How has it been for you in Dorset? Have you found that COVID's had a massive kind of change in the way that you've operated and the behaviours of the people, especially in terms of, have they been more anxious, or hasn't already been affecting you as much?
I think for me personally, I have made it my mission to basically try and achieve as much as possible. Now, that's my goal-orientated mind. It's both good and bad. The good is that I get stuff done. The bad is that I defocus from the moment. And this is why I love that you've brought this up, because it's tackling some of my weaknesses, something I'm not strong at. I admit that straight off the mark. And COVID has it destroyed my plans. You know, I had so many plans. I was going to be moving to Australia. I was going to be doing all this, that, and the other. But instead, I got a new job, and here I am. You know, working remotely from home in my parents' house. And you know, you can see all this as a negative. I see it as a positive, a new way to become a better person. Now, I've talked to you before about this. We've spoken off camera about realities. Now, when I said that, I meant as in like your world at the moment, because of COVID, is your house, your family, your friends, this small, you know, however big your house is, however big your garden is, that's all you've got. That's your reality. And what I'm trying to ask is, how do you make the best out of that reality? And I feel like I'm repeating this back at you, but there's an easy way to deal with COVID, and there's like a hard way. And I choose the hard way because that's who I am. Do you think that you're pushing yourself in this sort of reality?
If you'd asked me a year ago, I would probably have given you a different answer to what I'm about to. And I mean, now I'm a far less resistant person though than I have been in the past. You know, I think this idea of trying to control things is very natural to people. It's, you know, part of your kind of like reptilian mind, if you like, your ganglia is in your brain, and it, you know, it wants to put out these molds into the world. COVID's here whether we like it or not, right? So we can spend all of our time getting you know, down in the dumps about it and think, oh, I can't do this or that. Or you can just, you know, that classic saying of go with the flow, right? Taking your canoe upstream, just turn that canoe around and adjust. So my reality is basically, in my coping mechanism is just not to put out those molds. And if I can't do one thing, okay, I'll do another thing. It's a redirection. I've not got any sort of control in it or say in this, so I'll just kind of do what I can with what sort of, that's a classic saying, that do what you can with the time that's given to you, right? To quote Gandalf. But, there we go, we like that. But yeah, no, it's absolutely what that. It's just so different and so unknown, so uncharted, as you put earlier. Less is more, maybe, with our ways of wanting.
Yeah. Couldn't put it better myself, mate. I think that during this period of time, less is more than anything else. I mean, for those who can't see behind the camera, basically behind in my room right now, I've been sleeping on what you would call a Thailand mattress for the past 8 months. So I've gone full minimalism. I've got my desk to my left. This is my reality. It's a 10 by 10 foot room, and this is what I've got to deal with for this period of time. And for those who know me well, is that for the past 2 years I've been very much into exercise, and I know you are as well, Dave, and I'm used to having access to a gym. I don't have that here. Have you had to create your own home workouts like myself?
Yeah, it's definitely been a bit of an adjustment, and I'm nowhere near your caliber on Strava, Chris, so I'm not going to try and go there. But obviously I play a lot of sport, always have done, and I think that rugby is not going ahead this season, which is a real shame. So it's about accepting that and then redirecting our energies, you know, into like other ways of keeping fit and healthy. So massive practices on like CV work and cardiovascular work, home body workouts. Like I say, you can't go to the gym anymore, so just about kind of maintaining that sort of good nutrition and feeling good, and like you say, having that structure in your day, that discipline to just, it might be pretty cold, but just get your shoes on. Often I find the hardest bit of being, you know, sort of staying fit and healthy is the bit before it starts. You know, going to the gym is probably the hardest part. Once you're there, actually you're there and you might as well crack on. It's the same with going for a run. It's just about maintaining that and knowing that in the long run it's definitely worthwhile, because the season's going to come around next year. We want to be fit and healthy and ready when it does.
Yeah, without a doubt, mate. And you want to stay big, and you want to stay jacked, and you want to stay ready to take on the enemy when they're not your enemy. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no,
The thing with for me is it's just constantly trying to make yourself better, just that little bit more. Doesn't matter what it is. I mean, all I've got in the garage, like you say, it's cold. It's winter. You're like, oh, I don't want to do this. But when you get in there and you finally get the blood flowing, your hands start being white to the knuckle, and they start getting a little bit hot, and you're ready to go. And I think, like you say, once you get started, you can't stop it. You're just like, yeah, let's keep going. I was going to put something else here as well in self-help. Is this with exercise being a part of my life and a big part, and rugby being a big part of yours, do you miss that sort of team-oriented sort of environment, you know, having that ability to interact with people? I know that for me, although my sports are solo a lot of the time, I do miss that interaction with other people in classes, for instance, or in spin class or anything like that. Just that, you know, having people around you.
I think if you've ever played sports or done a club or a society where you are around other people and that becomes your norm, it's quite difficult to then deviate from that. I think it takes an incredibly sort of self-reflective and comfortable individual to be really wholly content just on their own for a prolonged period of time. And that's certainly not where I'm at. I need to, you know, bounce off other people, even if it's having a conversation over the phone or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I've always been around, you know, other young guys and playing sports, having that kind of camaraderie, if you like. Same with the cadets, I'm sure with you as well. You have that kind of idea of being in a team in unison, doing something together progressively, and having that goal, that unified front. I have that to a degree. I still feel with friends and my brothers who are like my best friends. So they're here with me now, and I'm very lucky and blessed to have that sort of
Well, they're
part
copies
to
of
my
you,
life.
Dave. So you know they're gonna have that extra positivity there.
Well, yeah, they'll wait and play some ball games, I'm sure. But no, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like you want to just make sure that even if you can't see people, that you're keeping each other going. And I think that you touched on a really important point, which, you know, is always picked up with things like Movember, which is male mental health, and that a lot of the time we are told and enforced to be quite stoic and cold, and yeah, rugby, like lads, and it's that kind of thing of you don't have to be like that. You can just put your arm around the guy and say, look, mate, are you okay? And they might say no, and it's having those skills, that relationships which you build on and off the field to then deal with that in a friendship capacity. So it all comes together for sure.
Yeah, I love that, because the camaraderie actually makes you a better person afterwards, because you're interacting, you're getting to help others as well as yourself. And I definitely developed that when I was in the gym. I've talked about silly stories on the podcast before of me making a fool out of myself and people coming to help me with weights when I couldn't lift them. It's that ability to have somebody there to be like, look, you're being a dick, I'm going to help you out, do the kindness of my heart, and just like do something like that. It doesn't have to be that extreme in my case, but like you said, putting your arm around another guy and just saying, it's okay, dude, we're going to be fine. You know, I grew up playing football. That was the complete opposite. And so for me, from the age of around 5 all the way up until the age of 16, I played football, and I'll be honest, kind of toxic in one way or another. I know that's a commonly thrown around word, but did you ever see that in the difference between rugby and football, that sort of camaraderie?
Not too much, to be honest. I mean, I never really had that experience of being in sort of football environment. I think the most I ever played football was for the Scouts, and vowed never to do it again after I missed a penalty. But it's one of those ones of, yeah, I think different sports attract different people, and there's, you know, with rugby, I think for me, the All Blacks were a kind of a go-to kind of philosophy, if you like, of what it
Badass
was
group.
to be a rugby player. Yeah, and well, just, you know, respect and teamwork and leadership and all of these big terms, these umbrella terms we throw around. That's what the vision was, to be a rugby player and to play at whatever level. And of course, you get different people, all types of people playing all types of sports. There's not a mold for a rugby player or a footballer. but it's just about making sure whoever you're around and whatever team you're a part of, that resonates with you on some kind of level. And yeah, I think in every sport you're going to get cliques. You get them at school, you get them in clubs and societies, but
Yes.
as long as you're okay, yeah, and it doesn't bother you, and you can kind of go about still feeling like you're wanting to be there and it's progressive, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's just like it's also partly you as much as it is part of the team. And I do like the fact that you've stated that it can be not the same in every. There's not a mold. There's not a structure for every single team. So yeah, really important case. I was going to ask you. I don't want to get too deep, too quickly here, but I do want to ask if you had a piece of advice or something that you've received over the years that either through teaching, through mindfulness, rugby, whatever it is, and you were to tell it to the future generations, maybe your future kids, or maybe something like that down the line, what would be the main piece of advice you would give to them?
I would probably say that saying like carpe diem, of like seize the day, is really valid. You know, when a day's gone, you don't get it back, so make the most of it. One thing I did read, or I might have heard it on a kind of video once, was of a story where this man, and I think it was Jim Carrey actually. He's, you know, obviously Dumb and Dumber, a great film, but he spoke about how his father was you know, a high-flying businessman, and went into the industry that he did, not because he wanted to, but because it would earn him a lot of money. And even then, when he had all this coming into the bank, he was made redundant and he was absolutely miserable. And he had effectively failed at something that he did not want to do. So any advice I would give to people is, if you can fail at something that you don't want to do, try and succeed at something that you love. And that idea of, yeah, you might shoot for the stars and fall short and you catch the moon, but at least you tried, and no one can take that away from you. So make the most of taking those opportunities that really sing to you.
Wow. I'm gonna end the podcast right there, mate, because that is a hell of a statement to make. And ironically enough, that I 100% back that, because that's something that is important to me at my heart, because there's a part of me that always wanted somebody to tell me that as a youngster, because we have a lot of job orientated, university orientated, qualifications orientated structures growing up, and we're told that we need to hit this mark and this mark by this amount of time, and you need to have a house and a car, and it's like that scene in Train Spotting where he says, grab buy a television, get a family, have this, that, and the other. And now you're starting to realize that none of it really matters. And the truth is that happiness and your choice to do what you want to do in life is key. So thank you so much, David Canham, mate. You may have been, up to this point, my favorite podcast through some absolutely killer pieces of advice there to people, and telling your story. And I'd love you to come back on at some point to further these questions that I still have, that I will get onto next time. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. This has been the Taylor's Tales podcast. This is Chris's Corner. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, and that's been David Canham. Thank you so much, guys, and I hope to see you next week.